The story takes place or starts in December of 1935, when a feisty white woman travels to a small village in India to argue with Mahatma Gandhi about sex. The woman was Margaret, the woman who coined the term birth control, the woman who founded Planned Parenthood, and the woman who helped millions of women around the world reclaim control of their ability to reproduce. But now here she is, in a tiny Indian village, about to have the most surreal public health debate in history. So maybe the story is about an absurd public health debate. But then again, maybe it's not. Margaret Sanger argued passionately with Mahatma Gandhi, trying to tell him that sex is a natural act between a man and a woman, and trying to persuade him to begin to push and advocate for birth control in India. But he refused. And he refused partly because of his own personal struggles with sex throughout his life. But after hearing her arguments, he passionately told her back that he believed that sex was a carnal, vile act, and that he believed to be truly free, his countrymen would have to abstain and only have sex for the purpose of procreation. And in so doing, he stalled what should have been the beginning of a conversation about sex and reproduction in a country that badly needed to talk about sex and reproduction. He really believed that he could persuade a country of almost 1 billion people to stop having sex. So maybe this is a story about how one of the most important historical figures of all time, an icon, a freedom fighter, failed miserably to understand a simple public health concept. But then again, maybe it's not. Margaret Sanger had persuaded millions of people around the world to embrace birth control. In the West, she arguably was one of a handful of people who changed the conversation about sex for decades to come. But when she arrived in this tiny village in India, she didn't change her argument. She went to a small village, spoke in front of women, men, and Mahatma Gandhi, using the same arguments about sexual liberation, sexual freedom that she used in the West. And of course it fell on dead ears. People in that country weren't ready to hear an argument like that. Women in that country weren't ready to even talk publicly about the subject. So maybe this is a story about how a health pioneer, about an icon for our times, a person who changed the conversation around sex in the West, failed miserably to understand a new cultural context, for those of us in technology, a new user base, and again, failed miserably to understand. But then again, maybe that's not what this story is about. Because Margaret Sanger and the people she partnered with for the next few decades worked tirelessly, relentlessly to push the birth control story forward in India. And 25 years later, she stood on a podium in front of the All India Congress with Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru when he announced major funding for Planned Parenthood and the opening of several centers throughout the country. So what this is a story about a killer app. If you can make something that allows you to have sex and not have babies, you have a killer app. But it's also a story of how technological disruption takes place. It takes place in a way that's messy. It takes place in a way that has to deal with the impossibility of cultural norms. It takes place in a forum that polarizes people who are already polarized to become more extreme than they ever were before. But if you have a killer app and you work hard enough on it, it'll still happen. So I thought this story might help you guys when you're working on your own technical innovations, when you're stuck, when you're pissed about healthcare reform, when you're mad at Republicans or Democrats, or pharmaceuticals, or your development team. Just remember Margaret Sanger traveling to a tiny village to debate Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi about condoms.